Hello and welcome to the Knitting Teaspoon podcast. I am Lisbeth, your host, and this is a podcast which is mostly about knitting but also some other crafts. I would like to start this episode right up front with telling you guys that this has been a crazy week for me. My boyfriend got admitted in the hospital. He is getting better, so please don't worry too much about that. But there's a fair chance that I'm going to burst to tears at any point during this episode. I will try to talk a little bit about the knitting content as usual podcast episode first, and then I will go a little bit in more detail about what kind of emotional roller coaster this has been for me. Yes, so I think I'm going to do it that way. Probably this episode is going to be a little less neat in terms of editing as well, and you will probably understand that if I'm at the hospital, I can't be video editing. So, well, I was hoping this was going to give me a lot of positive energy to just talk about what I like, but I'm not really sure if that's going to happen, but I will try. So, today I am wearing an Agnes top, one with whales on it, as you can probably see. I noticed last week that you could hardly see anything of the dress that I had made. I thought that you would be able to see a little bit more down of my body, and I don't know if I adjusted that in any way this week, but yeah, I can't really stand up because I'm sitting on a bar stool, so they are raised, and if I stand up I'm even lower than I am while seated, so that's not going to help this case, and I'm not an acrobat to show you guys how this works. But this is an Agnes top. It's a pattern by Tilly and the Buttons. Their patterns are amazing. So, yay! I think I've shown this as a finished object quite a few weeks ago. Then there has been a little bit of knitting progress on my Walrus Neestrumper. Last week I think I was in a row below or a few rows below where I started to turn the heel. I did that. I turned the heel. This is with, I knit, usually I knit continental style. This is my preferred method of knitting, but in color work I use both hands, so I know how to flick as well. This is not how I was initially taught how to knit. I was a thrower with like crazy long movements. I would like move my entire arm to wrap yarn around the needle. I've done that for probably around the first 20 years that I was a knitter. Well, I don't know if I can call myself a knitter all the time, but I think in 2014 I watched a video that there were also other styles and that they might be faster, and I suddenly increased my knitting speed within a month of trying continental style. I was at least 1.5 times as fast, and I must have increased speed since that moment. I just timed the amount of time that it took for me to knit around on a sock, as I did before, and then around continental style, and was definitely a lot faster. So in this part of the sock, I'm using, well, I think I always have the white yarn on my right hand, so in knitting with two-handed color work, my tension on the continental side, so on my left side this is your right side, I'm aware of that, but for me this is left, so this is my continental hand and this is my flicking hand. The tension is a little bit looser on the continental side, so this yarn tends to pop a little bit more. I'm not really sure if it's only a difference in tension, because it might also be that having one yarn to the left and the other one to the right causes the stitches to shift a little bit. Because if you look very close at this line, you will see, like, if there's a line here, just pick any one. I can't really tell where the lines are because I'm behind the sock and I can't see on the screen what I'm doing. But you will see that these lines are not perfectly like horizontal. They're slightly shifted up and down. So yeah, that it might be because of the way you flick the work around, you might cause the one float to be below the other float, so this may shift the stitches a little bit as well. But I like to use my continental hand for the contrast color, even if this usually means that there's a lot less stitches to knit with my preferred style of knitting. Although if I'm doing other color work in which there are also empty rows, it doesn't happen in this sock, but in the end it does. Like if I'm doing the ribbing, here's the other sock, it's finished. I showed you sock number 2. So in the other sock, like the only empty rows without color works are like right here in the toe. So I've had a little bit of non-color work in the other sock as well for the cast on, and yeah, here has been non-color work. So those parts I will knit left-handed. And in this case, it doesn't really shift the gauge that much because in like here you're doing a different stitch type anyway, so it's going to pull together anyway. And I think this tiny bit of the sock will be small enough to not notice anything anyway. But if there's like, for instance, my Marius sweater, and I know that I don't have it here, so if you don't know what this sweater looks like, you have some color work rows and then you have a few rows that aren't color work, and I will knit all those non-color work rows continental style usually. Yeah, so that's this has been my knitting progress. As you can see, I've put these on just double pointed needles. I used to knit exclusively on these kind of needles before I bought my higher sharps when I was in Sweden. Yes, but now I'm using them to pause this project. I do knit on the same type of needles for my blanket, just double pointed. I think they're prim, but I'm not really sure. Yeah, but not for working in the round anymore. I'm using those for the little squares in the middle that are so short that they don't need a very long needle, and they don't need a long cable that can get twisted and stuck in the rest of the work. So that has been a project, and I feel I'm completely surprised how much I've been able to tell about this. So yeah. Then apart from the knitting last weekend, I've also been doing some yarn dyeing. So I've made this skein. It's Drops Fable yarn, but I've started hand dyeing myself. I'm using acid dyes and citric acid and slowly cooking it in a pot and to set the dye. And yeah, I was aiming for a very bright red, and it's definitely a little bit more pink than I was hoping for, but I still think it's a very gorgeous color. It's very nice and deep saturated color. I could also really notice that that it was getting close to some kind of saturation point, although there's still some slightly wider spots, so it's not completely saturated, I guess. But yes, I'm very happy with this result. So this, I was already preparing this game while I was podcasting last week. So this happened on last Friday. At first, I was a little bit disappointed that it was more pinkish than reddish, but I still think it's very pretty. So it's okay. Also, it seems to have turned slightly more red in drying, so I don't know what this is, or maybe it's just a lighting situation. I don't have the best of light where I'm dyeing, so maybe that influences things. And then I dyed up this skein of, well, rainbowy goodness, I guess, on Saturday. I decided to just go try some other techniques to just dye spots on the yarn or little stripes, because when I dyed this, I'm going to wrap it. It's more of a hank, so you can see that there's some striping going on. You can also see that I did not manage to like dye evenly across the skein, and especially not evenly across both of the skeins, because one of these skeins definitely got more dye than the other one. I was trying to dye two skeins at the same time, but this was just an experiment, and I think it still turned out to be a very happy skein. I just wanted to see how the colors would blend together, because I only used the magenta and the yellow and the cyan dyes. I do also have black dyes, but apart from that, I don't have any other colors. So if I want another color, I will have to mix it myself. So this one was a mix of a lot of magenta and some yellow, I believe, and maybe some of the black dye. And here, can't remember, but I've written it down. So if anyone wants to know what I use exactly, I do have it written down somewhere. Yeah, so here I have tried to make a little rainbow and things like that. Yeah, I'm not completely happy with how this turned out, because I would like to dye a skein that's more even across, but then I think having it not completely even might be very good in terms of avoiding pooling. But yeah, so that's the skein that I dyed. Yeah, and then last week happened. Yeah, and then it was Sunday. I went to a family party on Sunday, and halfway I got a message that my boyfriend was in the hospital and that they would not let him go home anymore. So my sister was going to stay over for this week, because my little brother also graduated. He earned his master title this week. So she was going to stay from the family party until my brother's graduation, because my brother lives in the same town with me and the rest of my family lives in another side of the country, and we think that a 2 hours drive is like the end of the world, and that you shouldn't travel that far very often, because the Netherlands is a very small and crowded country. Within 4 hours you're all the way across on the highway, except for a lot of traffic jams. Like we are very crowded, so our traffic system is often jammed. Like if you're trying to get anywhere at 8 o'clock in the morning, good luck, you're probably going to be in a lot of traffic jam. If you try to make the same journey on a Saturday or a Sunday or at 11 o'clock, you're probably going to be just fine and very fast. So that's how our system works. Just probably the same everywhere, and around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, the same traffic jams happen, but in the other direction, because it's usually like spots where you have a lot of jobs and places where a lot of people live. They are somewhere else, and then people move in between those. So she was going to stay over. We were planning on just trying to make some bags. She had seen some of my project bags. Yeah, and it seemed a fun thing to do. She also likes sewing. She's also trying to knit, but she is not as much of a knitter as I am. I must say I'm not as much of a crocheter as she is. I do crochet, but not very often. Although sometimes I am completely taken away by a crochet project, and I will crochet and not knit at the time. This happened when I was making a blanket, for instance. I've made a huge 2x2 meter, which is over 2x2 yards, slightly over it, blanket of granny squares, just very simple ones, but that was crochet, and it took me quite some time to finish it, and in that time I hardly knit. But then on Sunday he went to the hospital. I was still feeling very much fine, so I visited him on Sunday and Monday, and yeah, the doctors came to take him away for some more research on what was going on Monday. And at that point, my sister and I decided, yes, well, we probably won't see him back before visiting hour, and so let's just go into the city and try to get us some fabric to start making bags. And at that point, I wasn't planning on buying much fabric. I just wanted to buy some, how do you call this, interfacing, yes, that's the English word, to make the project bags work, because I'd already ordered some online, but it hadn't arrived yet, and I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I wanted to have it right away, so I bought a little bit of that stuff in the shop. And then I saw this fabric, and you will recognize this probably because it's the same seahorse pattern that I've shown you last week, but this time it's navy blue with white instead of white with navy blue. And I saw it and I thought, yes, I just need to have this. So I had just have them cut a piece of 1 meter of fabric, so slightly over a yard. I think, yeah, those are like 10% off in size, if you're wondering. But so I just had the people in the shop cut this piece of fabric, and then I got a call from the hospital telling me that I had to make it to the hospital as soon as possible because something was going wrong with my boyfriend. So at that point I was so completely confused and not knowing what to do. So my sister took over from there. She finished her purchase as well, and she paid for this fabric. So it's a gift actually. Wasn't intending to have it as a gift, but you know, she paid for the fabrics that we had already cut, and then we went cycling as fast as we could to the hospital, not knowing if we would be able to see my boyfriend alive or not. This was at the main crisis point of last week. By now it's going fine, so, or relatively fine, considering the circumstances. He's going to make it. There's no doubt in him surviving this, so yeah. And then from that point, I did have my Valdres socks with me, but they, well, you can see. This is like a kind of project where you need a little bit of brain power to be able to knit, and I didn't have any brain power this week, so I cast on a new project, and it's a sock for my boyfriend, one of the Regia yarns. I don't know which colorway number, and it's probably not going to be on the screen, but you will probably see this a million times before I've finished it. So, or at least when I finish it. So maybe I will tell you guys then. Yeah. So I'm working on a sock, and this is all the progress that I have since Monday. Must admit that almost half of this was knit last evening while I was with him in the hospital. He's doing so much better, and I can really notice that him doing much better helps me to be able to knit again, to get a little bit back to normal again. But you know, if you're going to call cycling home from the hospital at 11 o'clock at night your new normal, then something is still definitely wrong. Maybe except if you work there, but if you are there for your partner or anyone who's dear to you, then it's not that great. So that was the last bit of my knitting content. If you guys don't want to hear any bit of the drama that I've been through, I can completely understand. You probably have enough to worry about in your lives as it is. I am hoping to get back a little bit more into my normal podcasting mode soon, but there's no way of telling right now when this is going to be. The most important thing for me is now that my boyfriend will recover, and I will do anything to help support him in that process. And yeah, so if you guys don't want to watch the rest of this episode, please go ahead and turn it off right now. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it a lot that you are interested in my knitting and sewing and everything. But I want to share a little bit more about what I've gone through. So I will probably put in some music here to give you guys some hint that if you're not interested, that you can leave now. So I think by now the music should be gone. I don't know. I can't hear it right now, so that will be a little bit of editing. But what has happened last week, I'm sorry if at any point you feel like these details are going to get too disgusting or whatever. Yeah, just feel free to turn off. It just means a lot that you're even here to hear what I have to say about this. So on Sunday, my boyfriend suddenly started coughing up blood. As I told you, I was at a family party, so I wasn't there. He wasn't allowed to be there because my family is like, everything that doesn't have a wedding ring, we are not interested in meeting them. So yeah, my boyfriend wasn't welcome at the party, so he was just home reading a book in the sun, and then suddenly started coughing up blood. And I'm very happy that he decided to go to the hospital at that point, that he didn't think like, let's see if it's over within a minute, or if this happens again in a few days, then I will contact the doctor. So in the Netherlands, our general practitioners are the first person that we go to. We can't just go to the hospital right away. If we think there's an emergency, then we can call 112. I think internationally it may sometimes be 911. But it's similar, and then you just say that you need an ambulance, and they can of course admit you right to the hospital right away. And there is like some emergency post at a hospital, but it's general practice is that you go to your GP first, and he can refer you to the kind of specialist that you need. But it was a Sunday, so the only general practitioner that is open on Sunday that you can easily go to is located at the hospital or in the hospital. I don't know how you would say this, but there at the emergency post there is a general practitioner that is going to look at you first. If you arrive there by ambulance, of course, those people are trained to check out what kind of emergency care you need. But this was not the case. My boyfriend actually felt pretty good, except that he thought it was weird that it was coughing up blood. So within it, the first day on Sunday, he couldn't eat. So at first I pushed away his phone call because I thought, I'm getting instructions here on this family party and this is important. Whatever you have to say, it can wait. So, and he didn't call me back a few times, so I didn't know it was an important call at that point. And then I got a text message that he was in the hospital and that he was that they were performing some research on him to find out why he was coughing up blood, and didn't seem very serious at that point. On Sunday evening, he asked me if I could bring him like some clean underwear for the next day and some socks and maybe his laptop from work so that he could like work from the hospital bedroom, because he was like, yeah, there's no reason why they are keeping me here. And then on Monday they tried to perform some more research, but for this they had to sedate him a little bit, and something went wrong in this procedure, and then he suddenly started bleeding a lot more. And at that point I was in this procedure I was at the fabric shop with my sister, and I'm so glad my sister was there. But yeah, he started to bleed a lot more, and at that point he could have easily drowned in his own blood if the doctors didn't do immediately what they did. And I'm very happy that he was at the hospital at the point where this happened, so that he could immediately receive the most of care. But it has been well, of course they went on with him right away, and someone there called me to tell me that I better make it to the hospital as soon as possible. And at that point I was like, I was like completely, I don't know what was going through my head anymore at that point, but panic mode was on. And we went to the hospital as soon as possible to get some information, and it took a while before they knew that we were there and that we needed some information. They set us apart in a room. Like they have these special rooms where they can give you bad news. They're supposed to be very calming and everything, but I don't know. I was just very glad that my sister was there, that I wasn't there alone. I could get some hugs when I needed them. But for the longest time we didn't know how things were going. I think it took them 2 hours from the point that we got a little bit of information that the first procedure was going wrong, and that they had to perform emergency surgery at that point, to the point where we heard that the operation was finished and that he was going to the intensive care. The surgery involved removing half his lung because they found some tissue that might be a tumor. We are not completely sure of this at this point, but this is the most likely scenario. They have told us that this is a tumor that is probably not spread through the rest of his body, but So my camera was full, so I had to remove some of the movies, some previous recordings, quite quickly. But on Monday, I was just very happy that my sister was there. It took them like 2 hours, maybe more, before we got more information on how the surgery was going. In the time, I called his parents to tell them that they'd better come to the hospital. I only had his mom's phone number. I never exchanged phone numbers with his dad until that point. Actually, this only happened a few days later that I extracted it from my boyfriend's phone. My boyfriend got to the intensive care, I think. My sister and I left the hospital close to 12 a.m. p.m. I don't know, the middle of the day, that point. If I say 11:30 a.m., then it's easier. But slightly after that. And I think around 6 o'clock, we got to see him again at intensive care. He had woken up. It was still like the operation is still very heavy, so it takes a while before you know how someone is doing. But they gave us a talk, and it was a very comforting talk in a sense that they were like, yeah, everything is going very, very good considering the circumstances, and he's doing well. I don't think they used the word great. Of course, they explained everything to us in Dutch, so they would not have used English terms in this process. But yes, he was. They were telling us basically some very comforting talk that he was doing fine, and then we got to see him, and I know that my mom, his mom, and I were just, we didn't think he looked good at all at that point. It was very white, and so we talked to him for a little bit. He couldn't bear to hear us talk for long. He was able to talk a little bit by that point himself, but it hurt him, so he asked us to talk. And you know, if you see someone in a hospital, there's just tubes going everywhere, and it was just very shocking to see. So at that point, we had to let him sleep for a while. So we went to go and have dinner at a place very close. There's a mall close, and we went to see if there's any place we could have dinner. This was on a Monday, and Monday evenings are very difficult to find eating places in general. But yeah, we needed one on Monday, so we finally found one, and we had dinner. And then after dinner, we went back to him, and at that point, he was already doing. He already looked better, so there was improvement of the situation. But then you start to get at a point where you need to call friends to tell them what happened. His parents informed the family. I haven't met most of the family yet, so his family doesn't meet up very often. Part of the reason is that a lot of his family lives abroad, so I see his parents fairly often, but not the rest of his family. Even his sister is in New Zealand at this point, so yes, we had to inform family and friends about what happened, and I'm pretty sure that I've caused some minor heart attacks or something by not being trained to inform people about bad news. But yeah, it was very weird. Also, on Saturday we had a friend of his over, and I called her on Monday, and she couldn't believe it as much as I couldn't believe that he had to have major surgery, because on Saturday they had just been going to a festival and they had been fine, and it was just too much to comprehend at that point. There's probably better terms for this in English, but I don't even know how I feel in Dutch, and the English words are difficult in that sense. I've never had to use them before, so yeah. On Tuesday, we went back to the hospital. I know that my boyfriend had asked for a good story, because it hurt him too much to talk much himself. On Tuesday were some minor complications, because they had removed half a lung, so half a vital organ in my head, and the remainder apparently always collapses in this process, because there's a vacuum around your lungs apparently. I'm starting to get some kind of emergency training on how the human body works. But from that point, I will just keep it a little bit shorter. There was a minor complication on Tuesday, which caused him to stay on the intensive care for 1 day longer than they expected. And then on Wednesday, he was changed to a regular nursery place. I don't know how you would call this, but where they take care of patients in the hospital that need a little bit more recovery time there, but do not necessarily need to have their heart rate monitored at all times anymore. So it is at a place where he can also receive flowers and everything. This is not allowed in the intensive care, because you might bring in too difficult bacteria to deal with for the patient, so you have to disinfect or wash your hands very carefully before you enter, and you also have to do this after you leave, because they might also carry some bacteria that might be dangerous for other people. But for now, his prospects are very good. He is awake, he is alert. Yeah. And I don't even know how I feel. At some point, I believe it was on Wednesday, I noticed that when I went to visit him on Wednesday evening, I went there with a smile on my face, because for the first time, I was completely convinced that he was going to stay alive, and yes, for the first time I was able to completely believe that he was going to survive, that nothing was going to go wrong with him anymore. And visits on Wednesday evening, we even tried to watch a little bit of a movie in the evening. After, I think, 3/4 of an hour, he was completely exhausted from lying in the bed and looking at the screen, and he had to take his painkillers, which caused him to go to sleep very quickly. But we did that, and we never finished the movie. But being able to be there and hold his hand through these things are very important. And where on Wednesday he could only keep up to do this for 3/4 of an hour. Yesterday we watched an entire movie, and I think it was one that was like 2.5 hours or something, including the commercials that are in between because we watch television. Not some kind of Netflix-like service. And before it, we had already watched the news, so he had been awake for like 3 hours straight. And, he is jumping back into being healthy, and it's yes, it's really good to see how fast the progress is going, and it's kind of scary as well because they're already talking about releasing him from the hospital in only a few days' time, and there's nothing that I want more than for him to be able to be home again. But at the same time, it feels very safe to know that when he was in the intensive care, it felt very safe that he was there, because then you know that the doctors are constantly monitoring him and that he is receiving the best of care, the kind of care that I wish I could give him, but I know that I cannot. Yeah. But he's doing great, and that makes me feel a lot better, but still it's an insane roller coaster, and I don't wish for anyone to ever have to go through this roller coaster. But I know that he is young and strong, and that he went into his surgery with in a very good shape for the kind of operation that he had. So his prospects are very good, and this is a great comfort to me. But still, it's difficult. I think one more thing that I would like to say today is that it's also very heartwarming to see how many people care, to know how devastated his friends were with the news, to know how much they care, to see how often they inform how things are going. It's very heartwarming. It's less heartwarming to see how insurance companies deal with these kind of situations, because we would go on a holiday next week for the weekend to visit my friends in Stockholm, and understandably this holiday has been cancelled, but apparently having major surgery the week before isn't a good reason to cancel your holiday or something. Some people are so very unhelpful, and it's tough to deal with those kind of situations. I must say, not all of the help desks that I've spoken to were so unhelpful, but it's difficult. And I know that those people need to earn their money, but still, it feels so very unreasonable. Like you have enough going on with just worrying about whether he will stay alive or not, and you don't want to worry about being able to cancel your flight or your hotel. But it's going to be fine. I think I'm turning into something that is really not pretty to look at, so I'm going to stop here, and if you've watched till the end, then thank you very much. If you didn't, then I completely understand as well. I hope that next week will be a lot better, but I'm not really sure if I will podcast at all. If I'm not podcasting, it's probably because I'm too busy taking care of him. He is likely to be home by next Friday. So I don't know if I will be able to podcast at that point, but we will see how things go, and when I will be able to podcast again, because I feel like I needed to share this, and I'm sorry for not being able to finish sentences this week. It's just beyond me at this point. But thank you very much for joining me and listening to me. It really means a lot. And I'm going to turn off the camera now, and then I'm going to edit this podcast probably somewhere in the evening. If it's a little bit later, then, well, I believe you will all forgive me, and if you won't, then that's your problem, not mine. I will go back to the hospital now to hold my boyfriend's hand. So I sincerely hope that all of you guys are having much better weeks than that I have had. That you've had a better week, and that you will have a better week than I've had. And please don't worry too much, because I'm crying right now, but most of the time I'm just celebrating all the little victories of his recovery, and it's not as bad as it may seem right now. So, bye.